Hey, good morning, Chad with the Word and Coffee. Today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 8. We're going to continue talking about the flood and Noah and his family and the things that went on during this time, during the flood, during the judgment of the earth for sin. And so let's get right into it. Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. I'm going to stop right there for a second. One of the things that I've been asked before, I had a guy one time, I remember I was in the 7th grade, and I had a question posed to me by this guy. I can't remember his name. I can still see his face. It's kind of funny, but anyway, he asked me. He said something about God making mistakes, and he said, "Yeah, God makes mistakes." And I said, "No, God doesn't make mistakes. He wouldn't be God if he made mistakes." And he said, "Well, it says in the Bible that God forgets things." I was like, "No, it doesn't. Where are you talking about?" And he said, "I'll find out. I'll find out." And he came back to school the next day or something, and he said, in Genesis chapter 8, it says he forgot about Noah. And and I didn't know how to answer it. I didn't know what he was talking about, and went and looked, and I missed an opportunity, I think, to learn a little bit and to share with him what all this meant. But we find out that the the way that this is worded is what's called an anthropomorphal phrase, or an anthropomorphism, and it's basically almost like personification. When we give human qualities to an inanimate object, this is giving human qualities and placing human um, experiences or human terms onto God. God didn't forget Noah. He sustained Noah. He knew Noah. God doesn't forget anything. He's incapable of forgetting things that he's set into motion. So he's perfect. He's omniscient. So he knows everything. So he didn't forget, but the way that the wording here is written, it's just to say that when he says he remembered, it's that, hey, Noah had been put on here on this ark, and he was there, and there was this long amount of time that had gone on, but God was sustaining him the entire time, and it's just to have figurative language that helps us to be able to kind of understand that Noah had been in this ark for a long time, and at times Noah may have felt alone. I know that in my life there are times, even though I know God's with me, there's times I've felt like I just couldn't find Him. And Noah and his family were on the ark for about a year, as we'll see in a minute, and it was like I said, I'm sure a tough time for them. This wasn't pretty. This was judgment for sin on the world. But like I say, it's not that God forgot them. So when we read something like that, we need to kind of understand that it's not, everything is not written in a absolute, strictly literal sense as it relates to the way we understand things. Um, and that doesn't leave the Bible open for just wide open interpretation. What it says is we need to read things within context. We need to understand the different writing styles and different things that are included in the way that people write, to understand that we might not necessarily understand it at first glance, but if you do a little bit of study, you can kind of figure out, well, just because it says God remembered doesn't mean he forgot. It's just that figurative language of saying, okay, Noah's been on the ark this whole time, and maybe there hasn't been a whole lot of things happening that were noteworthy, other than the fact that once again God was sustaining them, keeping them alive, keeping them safe. But then we're about to start talking about something else that happened. So it's going to open up an ability for this new chapter to start. So Okay, also, the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained, and the water receded steadily from the earth. And at the end of 150 days, the water decreased. All right, so now then we're going to get into some different things. What happens next as it goes from verse 4 on down to around 13. uh, we start seeing about the dove, the raven that Noah let out, and then the two doves, or the dove that he let out that came back and had an olive leaf eventually, and that was how Noah knew that it was time he could, start looking to see that it was okay that the earth was becoming suitable to be re-inhabited. But I do think that something's kind of interesting that I want to get to down here in verse 13. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the water was dried up, and the earth then on the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. All right, so Noah was doing this testing. Noah was sending out the raven and the doves, or the dove twice, and or three times actually, I guess. And so in doing so, Noah was doing his part. He was checking to see, whether things were okay to proceed out of the ark and that kind of thing. But he waited on God. He didn't, when that dove came back with the olive leaf in her mouth, he didn't say, "Hey, everything's good, let's go." When he let it go the next time and the dove didn't come back, he didn't say, "Hey, the dove found somewhere to rest, let's get out of here." Noah waited on God to say, "Hey, now you can go." Even though Noah was doing his part, Noah was making sure to use the resources at his disposal to check things out and to see what the environment was. He didn't make decisions without God leading him to make those decisions. So then Noah comes out and he brings with him, all those animals that are in the ark with him, and God tells him, go and breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. We've already kind of seen this happen one time back in the Garden of Eden. So this all happens, like I said, at the end of the flood, and the waters are subsiding. Then we get down to verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Wow, so Noah took two of every unclean animal, and then he took seven of every clean animal. And we see here why he had the seven, because if he had taken just two of every clean animal, and then when they got finished with the flood and came off, and he was gonna make offerings, he would have created some mass extinctions of clean animals, and God knew that. So God provided a way, even before the judgment. God provided a way by bringing seven of those clean animals. And this took something that we sometimes don't really think of in this story. It took some serious faith on Noah's part, because you think about it, if there's only seven lambs on the entire face of the planet, seven sheep, and you're going to start sacrificing some of them, man, that's real sacrifice. If there's only seven cattle on the entire face of the planet and you start sacrificing some of them, that's real sacrifice. So many times in our lives, we want to give out of abundance instead of giving with the proper sacrificial attitude in giving. And Noah did that. Noah gave God what was God's already. And even though, it would have been looked at probably from a practical standpoint of, hey, wait a minute, we only got a few of those things. We can't be killing a few of them. He did what God led him to do, what God told him to do. And, we see right here in verse 21, and the Lord smelled the soothing aroma. Once again, it's that getting back to that same thing, the anthropomorphal phrase that God smelled something. Does it mean that God physically had to smell that smell and say, "Ooh, that smells good"? Even though that's what it says, we all understand God. We can burn animals all day long and it doesn't please God if we're not doing it with the right heart. What pleased God about this was the fact that Noah was sacrificially giving and being obedient to God, and that's what pleased God. Not just that something smelled good, it was that our worship and our willingness to make sacrifice and to actually do as we're told to do and keep the commandments God gives us. That's what's pleasing to Him. So this was a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the Lord said to Himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. I find this to be fascinating. I mean, this is two very, very different thoughts. So God is pleased with Noah's sacrifice, but the very next thing He says is, I know that man is evil. I know that every thought he has is evil from his youth, but I'm never going to destroy every living thing again the way I've just done it. Wow. I mean, that to me seems like two very contrasting thoughts. But when we realize that God was so pleased by Noah's willingness to sacrifice and by Noah's willingness to be obedient to Him, that made God willing to kind of, I guess, it's hard to come up with the words, but God was willing to show us mercy and grace, even though we don't deserve it. And, I think that if God was so pleased with that sacrifice that Noah made, how much more pleased was He with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross? And, I used to read this verse, Isaiah 53, verse 10, and I would wonder about this. It says, but the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring, he will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Now, we know that Isaiah 53:10 is actually prophesying about Jesus Christ and Jesus' sacrifice, and it's wording that's used to describe what Jesus is going to go through. And I mean, we've seen, back in Genesis chapter 3, how God said He was going, to bruise His heel and crush His head, talking about the serpent, and the serpent would bruise the heel of man. But so this is what we're seeing here is Jesus going to the cross. And now, it makes more sense when you stop and think about how much God honored Noah's sacrifice and Noah's willingness to be obedient in that sacrifice, and how He made promises for the whole world because of Noah's obedience and his sacrifice. How much more has He done for us because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross? Over here in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 in verse 21, it says, He made Him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in Him. So Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, where he was made to be sin, it pleased God in the fact that his son was willing to die for us and his son's sacrifice for us. It pleases him so much that it allows us the opportunity to have the salvation of Jesus Christ in our hearts. And our lives can be totally transformed by that sacrifice that Jesus made. So Noah, being a type of Christ, and us seeing types of Christ throughout the entire Bible, because once again, as we said yesterday, even the Bible is about the gospel from Genesis 1 all the way through Revelation. Every bit of the Bible is about Jesus Christ and about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And Noah, making that sacrifice, being willing to do what he was supposed to do, pleasing God through that, is a picture of Jesus actually sacrificing himself and being willing to die on that cross, and the Father sacrificing his Son for us, and it pleasing God so much that Jesus was obedient to that sacrifice, that he counts that as righteousness to us, even though we don't have righteousness in and of ourselves. It's all through Jesus Christ and through his sacrifice. So those are some thoughts on Genesis chapter 8. I hope you guys have a great day, and we will see you next time.